Insight 178. Simply stated, just look at the whole of existence, and from this establish your perspective. One's concept of women, men, gender, attraction, emotional love, mental connections, admiration, sex for procreation, love, and the whole of life, all are to be properly defined as they relate to each other in the whole of existence. This perception and deep contemplation ought to be imbued with rich knowledge from this text in order for the student to be dynamically aware of the forces and influences at play trying to subdue him and his mind from a life of happiness and self-direction. This is the last insight of this chapter. So you want to look at the whole perspective and the whole of existence and establish your perspective, concepts, understand the concepts of men, women, objects, animals, plants, everything that is there, and also the interrelation of men and women, the interaction, what kind of relationship or what kind of relation is there. By relationship, I mean, for example, you have bread and butter, you eat, the relation of the bread and butter to you, it's food, you know. So every object and also situation have relationships, relation to each other, they're relative to each other, you know, and so define them. Persons could have multiple and constantly changing definitions. Define those, become familiar with them, so that they're in your mind, very vivid and clear. And you're doing this so that and you're learning about attraction, gender. You're seeing the interplay of these things. For example, you see there's a show about how a few people are put into some kind of house or a place, and they're pretty much every activity that they do and interaction that they have with each other is recorded. And so it itself, the interaction between the people, is a show. And so I like to watch those because it's a great learning experience to see how people interact with each other. And that's the major reason why I like the show, to see how people interact with each other. How is the makeup of each person? What do they show, and how? It's just a marvelous thing, and so marvelous tool to learn and see how people interact with each other. And so you're trying to get a very good inside picture of each interaction and of all of existence, so that for the student to be dynamically aware, very, very aware of the forces and influences at play trying to subdue him and his mind from a life of happiness and self-direction. You want to be aware of how people trick each other, what are the motivations for doing things, and you want to see and understand the human mind, how and why they do things that they do. You want to become aware of the forces at play. I'm going to read on the explanation. Just as one is aware of the nature of water and sand, and knows the nature of mud when water and sand are combined, similarly, one ought to look at the nature of women, men, gender, attraction, emotional love, mental connections, admiration, sex for procreation, love, and the whole of life, including job, career, family life, ambitions, play, etc. The student should come to understand the nature of each. Then he ought to see how each relates to the other, and when they interact, what happens. In this manner, one comes to understand the small interactions of life and their relation to larger and larger situations, and their relation to the largest picture of life, such as the planets and existence. By this method, one becomes aware of the forces that lead one to happiness and a life of freedom, and the forces which subdue happiness into sadness and lead to a slavish life. In short, this is the process of correcting our perspective. It is learning various perspectives, from the tiniest microscopic subatomic structures all the way to the macroscopic universal reality. These viewpoints are necessary for an individual to make correct, informed decisions.